What's up, everyone? So, when we released Cockroaches as the first not so sexy episode for February, it really dawned on me afterward that's going to be a hard one to top. But I hope this one is equally from the dark depths of real estate investing and that hopefully you still thinks it chalks up to the theme of not so sexy February. So, we're going to take a brief moment to discuss how you handle drug activity in your building or in your unit. This is something that I don't have a ton of experience in, and I guess I'll kind of count myself lucky because I said in the previous one I've had cockroaches. I've called myself the Grim Reaper of tenants because I've had more deaths than I care for at this point. But I really haven't dealt too much with drug activity. But I do have some experience with this, so I think we'll delve into some of the things that I have done in the past with properties that I've managed where we've had to deal with large or fair amounts of drug activity.
Building a real estate portfolio is as much about buying properties as being a de facto entrepreneur. I'm Karina Ufinger. I'm a multi-property investor, rental management company CEO, and also a landlord coach. I'm going to show you the systems and knowledge you need to thrive as a real estate entrepreneur. From your first property purchase to building a portfolio of passive income where you work less than 5 hours a week, you'll learn the essential information and skills to build a profitable portfolio and live the life you truly want. Whether you are well on your journey or just starting out, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Landlord Chick Podcast.
So the first thing everyone wants to know in regards to drugs is, how do you know for sure there's drug activity in the building? And I know it's something that's kind of hard to maybe concretely determine, especially with the larger the building. If you have a smaller one like a duplex, triplex, quad, even an 8-unit, it's a little bit easy to tell based on traffic whether or not you might have that problem. If you can't really tell based on traffic, then what you might be able to tell from is the odd hours of the traffic. Generally speaking, drug deals will typically happen in the evening or late afternoon, middle of the night even sometimes. And there'll also be people that usually won't go inside the building. With drug deals, usually what happens is the drug dealer, who is going to be living in your building at this point, he or she is going to come out to the car, and they're going to pretend to have a very casual conversation that lasts no more than like 3 minutes because they don't want to make it seem like we're there. They don't want to draw attention to themselves, but yet they can't just like pass it off and leave right away because that's an equally large red flag. So generally, they're going to just have a quick chat about 3 minutes. There's going to be just some sort of sly movement of like a hand inside the car, like tap the inside of the door. That's what it's supposed to look like. In reality, it's a drug deal. Those are some of the things you can look out for. Your other tenants are going to be your best eyes, though. They're going to be the ones that can tell you, oh, the traffic is really bad. It happens at this time of the day, and they're usually here for no more than X number of minutes. That's going to be your strongest indicators of drug activity. Unless, of course, you are blessed with this opportunity. And this is, hand to God, it's a true story. A property I was managing about 8 years ago. The tenant called up the office. She lives in 2 duplexes. Well, there's 2 duplexes that made up like a little 4-unit cul-de-sac that we managed. And she called up and she said, I think my neighbor is dealing drugs. And I said to her, okay, ma'am, can you give me the list of reasons why you think your neighbor in this other building is dealing drugs? What sort of activity are you seeing? Oh, well, I'm not sure about activity, but I just bought pot from them. Yeah, take a moment to process that. That was an actual phone call I received. Now, granted, this person was not the smartest tool in the box. She definitely, who calls their property manager and admits that? But there are other ways, if you don't have a tenant like that, that you figure out drug activity. Something else that you can do is you can obviously post an inspection for the unit. You can go through the unit. This is where it gets a little tricky. Typically, when you do an inspection, you're not going into cabinets. But I have had it where I've done occupied inspections and drug paraphernalia has been just flat out in front on the coffee table. Like, zero cares were given about hiding it. It was just flat out there. Crack pipe, white powder, razor blade, all the kind of stuff. So in that scenario, it's just like, oh, well, this is rather convenient. This is my proof that there's drugs in here, and then I'm just going to go to the police with this. And this leads me to the next step in this. Once you have some sort of indication about the possibility of drug activity in your building, for some people, this seems counterintuitive because they feel like they don't want to have the increased police presence at the building because they're afraid of what the other neighbors that live in the building are going to think. Here's the reality of this situation, though. If you've gotten to this point where you think you have drug activity, one of the quickest ways you can actually resolve this is by incorporating the police, the sheriff department, and having them observe your building, keep an eye on it. Likely they're going to do a bigger investigation. And if they find something, then you know what? Say great and get that tenant out. Get them moved out and get it re-rented. And just be honest with your tenants. If somebody calls and says, hey, I've noticed the police here a lot. Well, we're just making sure that the building is safe. We've had some reports of some stuff going on. So we've just asked them to keep an eye on it just to be sure everyone's safe. More likely than not, in that scenario, the tenants are going to view the increased police presence as something nice because you've taken the time to explain to them that this is actually preventative. You're trying to keep the building safe. It's not like they're just constantly policing around and they have no idea why the police are there. And you're like, oh, I have no idea why they're there. Because if you tell them you have no idea why the police are there, it's just going to make the situation worse. So it's always best that when tenants start to question it, when you ask the police for help, that you just kind of fess up and say you think something's going on and you're having the police start to address it. You're not going to tell them what's going on. I know sometimes we tend to think that a tenant's imagination is worse than the reality. Yet this is one of the few times where I'm like, you know what? We need to kind of keep it under wraps. They just need to know that you are actively working on something to keep everyone else in the building safe. Once you've involved the police, usually what they're going to do is they're going to do stakeouts. They might already have an idea, by the way. This is something I should mention. When you call your local police department and you ask for the drug and gang activity department, you might find out that they might be watching that neighborhood already because they know there's an increased drug activity. So you might find out that your building is part of this little street neighborhood watch program, that they already know there's a lot of dealing going on, a lot of drug activity going on, and they might actually welcome the ability to do more concrete surveillance of your building to help them get the problem under control. So it's really important that you don't look at the police as this awful thing to get involved in this situation. Not going political at all, but just from the perspective of they have the biggest resources to try and help you get this under control really quickly. The other reason you want to start getting them involved is because in most states, to evict on drug activity, which might get to the point of needing to do this, you would need some sort of documentation that shows police cooperation, police investigation, and even possible arrests. Now, I don't want to go too much into this because honestly, it's going to vary pretty big by your state. But generally speaking, you can have somebody get arrested for dealing drugs. And let's say they make bail because, well, they got fat cash and they got people with fat cash because they deal drugs. So they get out of jail. They're going to go back to their home. They're going to be there. Their trial could obviously take another 6, 8, 9, 10 months. It could take a seriously long time. In order to evict that person, in most states, you're going to need that documentation that says that you're working with the police, there was an arrest. And here's the part I want to make sure you understand. There are some states where that just because they got arrested doesn't mean that you could actually evict them, because it gets back to this idea of innocent until proven guilty. However, there are states that are sort of coming around to the idea that, you know what, If the police are involved, there's obviously something going on. There's something semi-legit going on here. So chances are, yeah, they're probably dealing drugs. It's just waiting for the trial. It's going to take months and months. So what's really nice is that some states are starting to give a little bit of freedom in this area where if there is actual police involvement, you have communication with them. Maybe you have statements from the police department, the police that have surveyed your building. You can go to court with that. And in those states that require proof, you should be able to push through an eviction. So that's why I say it's really important to start getting the police involved, because at some point you're going to want to remove the tenant from the premises. And in scenarios where you have roommates or a married couple, I have had people question, do you get rid of the person that is left behind? Because in some instances, you might have the roommate go to jail, but you don't have the other person who was not a perpetrator go to jail. You know, for whatever reason, nothing got pinned on them, or one of them took the entire fall, or the spouse absolutely had no idea what was going on in the basement or whatever. My belief on this is that you should start with a clean slate. And this gets back again to your state statutes. What you'll find is that here in Wisconsin, you evict a unit based on drug activity, which means you evict the unit. You don't evict an individual tenant. So in that scenario, here we would be getting rid of the entire unit and we would be staying and we would be starting over. If you live in a state where you can do partial unit eviction, so you can get rid of one tenant but not the other, then this is where I would strongly recommend that you go through and evict both tenants. The way you would be able to do this is if you had a clause in your lease that says if the unit is found to have drug criminal gain activity in it during the course of the lease, it doesn't matter who the guilty parties are, according to the police, both tenants can be evicted for the conduct. Again, a little bit of complication here, but based on your state statutes, that's what I would recommend if you cannot evict the entire unit for the activity. And this is something that you'll have to conduct, sort of start a conversation with a lawyer, check your state statutes, and figure out where your state lies in regards to evictions. Is it the whole unit? Can you evict one portion of the unit, not the other one? But it's a good thing to know in the back of your mind that you want to keep the police involved. You want to make them your ally in this. Now, chances are, at some point, the tenants are going to find out for real what's going on. Either there's going to be an actual drug raid with the DEA, there's going to be maybe other major law enforcement's involved in a drug raid. And all what this is going to be, it's going to be a mea culpa. Not even really necessarily a mea culpa. I don't want to label it as that, because this is going to be something where you're going to have some PR skills and you're going to need to have them. In these instances where you've had a drug raid, what I strongly recommend, or any sort of thing that definitely like red flag, like just neon strips, it shows completely that there was drug activity here and on a large scale, I highly recommend you go on a massive PR campaign with all your current tenants. You call them. Your first should always be a call. Maybe even if you live close, start knocking on doors and then leaving handwritten notes for them to call you. Go hardcore with your PR campaign to make sure they know that when you noticed things or you had things brought to your attention, that you started to act right away. You were the one that got the police involved. You were the one that gave them carte blanche to complete the investigation and to help you get the issue under control. You want to be full honesty and really on the forefront of your PR in this area. Because if you fail in this area, if you don't necessarily address it with your tenants, what could easily happen is they just kind of begin to think, is this place really safe? Like, did the landlord even know that that was going on? Or did the DEA just come in and raid the building because of what they knew? So that's why I think it's really important at a certain point, especially if you have large-scale drug activity, you have raids, or you have DEA, other law enforcement involved, and it gets noticed by your tenants, that when everything's said and done, go on a huge PR campaign. Knock on doors, make phone calls. Like I said, leave handwritten notes for them to call you. Just go full bore like you're a political candidate knocking on doors trying to get votes. Because what you're trying to do basically is get votes from tenants that they will stay put and that they realize that you're a serious landlord who takes their safety with the utmost concern. So it's really important that you get the police involved. You stay on the forefront with your tenants in the aftermath. In the moment, you don't necessarily want to get your tenants involved. I don't recommend you call them asking them for if they've seen things or anything like that. But of course, if they approach you with information, you want to take it, but you don't necessarily want to go fishing for it, because fishing for it, coming from a landlord to a tenant, that can look kind of sketch too. So absolutely take any information you're given, be in contact with them after the fact, get the police involved, and just know that as long as you get this under control quickly, you won't develop a reputation. If you let it go on for too long, if you're too afraid to pull the trigger, if you're too afraid about the attention or having everybody in the building move out because you think there might be drug activity, and what happens if there's increased police presence? If you start to worry about these things, you get bogged down on it and it goes on for months and months, that's when you're going to start losing your good tenants. Your building's going to develop a reputation in the community where people who don't even necessarily have bought from anybody in the building yet, they might start knocking on doors, looking for places to buy in that building because word gets around about that building. So I strongly encourage you that as soon as you feel like this is happening in your building, take it with the utmost seriousness. Do some surveillance yourself if you can. If you get a tip from a tenant about traffic, things like that, schedule inspections. Make sure you give the minimum amount notice required by your state, and make sure you're going in every single room and you go everywhere that is physically possible, just so you know you're not missing anything. If you go there and there's a locked bedroom or they try and give you resistance, say, no, I need to get in that bedroom. And if I don't get in that bedroom, I will issue a 5-day notice for compliance, whatever your compliance notice is in your state. Be really serious about seeing every room in that unit, in that building. And this goes for storage units as well in the basement. If you have those, I call them chicken wire storage units in a basement, look through those too. Because as crazy as this sounds, I've had instances where I have toured properties with other owners and they've asked me to come over, give them opinions, things like that. And we found like a little marijuana dealing chicken wire storage unit. And I found ones where there were probably other drugs involved too. But that's why it's important that you check every nook and cranny associated with the building, especially if there's some other place that they could easily go to stash their drugs, stash their paraphernalia, or even a place that they could make it that isn't in the unit, thinking, oh, well, they'll never come down here and look. This is also why I'm a huge advocate of having controlled access to basements, in the sense of you don't want to have a bunch of rooms that are sort of a free-for-all, like go pick a unit and put a padlock on it sort of situation. I strongly encourage you to get to issue your own padlocks for those sorts of situations. Be checking the storage unit, the chicken wire storage units. If they're fully enclosed ones, you should absolutely be including notice in those when you have suspicion of drug activity, because if they're going to store stuff, it's likely going to go down to that storage unit thinking that, oh, well, they won't go there. But now I want to tell you that on the flip side of this, just because you have drug activity doesn't mean you're a bad landlord. You know, a lot of people tend to think, oh my gosh, where did I mess up with my screening? Some of this, you know what, there's a very good Johnny Depp movie from early 2000s where he was an upscale drug dealer. And that's the reality of this, is that you can't necessarily peg somebody for being a drug dealer based on their appearance. I mean, you could obviously look at Breaking Bad and Walter White as an example as well, but you know, you can't really go based on appearance, and they might not even have something on their record before because they haven't gotten caught. The good ones, well, they don't get caught. By police, at least. They can get caught by neighbors. They can get caught by their landlords. It's totally, totally possible. But I don't want you to beat yourself up too much. Now, if it turns out that you rented to someone and you didn't do a background check and they had 3 priors for possession and dealing, well, then maybe you should probably kick yourself in the butt a little bit and take your background check a little bit more serious. But there have been instances where the drug activity was completely out of left field because they didn't have any priors. They really came across as like an upstanding citizen. They had, a 5-figure job, a 6-figure job, absolutely amazing credit score. You just can't make an assumption based on how somebody looks or what their piece of paper looks like. So if you do end up in a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that Kathy, who's a VP of human resources at blank, deals crystal meth, don't kick yourself about it. If you did your due diligence, if you did your background check, she have any priors, don't get caught up in it. Don't think you're a bad landlord. Don't think you're a bad tenant screener. It's just one of those anomalies. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode on drug activity and taking control of it in your buildings. Next week's Not So Sexy episode, I'm not sure how long it's going to last because it's kind of hard coming up with these topics, but I got another one coming at you next week, and we got one more episode of Not So Sexy February, and then March, we're going to start out with a different style Q&A, one I haven't done in a while. So follow me over on Instagram at LandlordChick because I'll ask for you to submit questions for that Q&A, and we'll just have a fun time at the beginning of March. All right, guys, hope you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you next week.